Chris, just introduce yourself, would you?
Chris Pudney, and I'm a professor at the University of Bath.
And what do you do here?
So in my group we're interested in trying to track drugs, where they come from, and particularly looking at the presence of drugs in schools.
Okay, and I'm Helena Conibear, and I'm the founder of the charity, the Talk About Trust. So how did you get involved with what I call fake vapes and finding things like THC and SPICE and vapes? How did that come about?
It really came out of work in prisons. So we do quite a bit of work of trying to detect SPICE in the UK prison system. So SPICE is a drug that's absolutely endemic in the British prison system. So it's associated with nearly half of the non-natural deaths of men in the prison system. So it's considered an incredibly risky drug, really endemic.
Could you tell us what SPICE is? Could you sort of explain it?
So SPICE is a synthetic man-made drug, and it was originally developed to try and kind of be a mimic of cannabis, so to work in the same way in the brain that cannabis does. But quite quickly people realised that it carried a lot of risks with it, so it never really became a drug that we really use. And it's a drug that we'll now see is really commonly used in prisons and common with people who are homeless. So essentially people that are incredibly vulnerable.
So it's cheap. And why is it so much more dangerous? What's so potent about it? Is it its strength?
Yeah, so the way it acts in the brain is a much stronger effect than THC, the psychoactive component of cannabis, acts in a much stronger way. So it gives rise to symptoms that are much more aggressive. So psychosis and seizures, and it can cause cardiac arrest as well. So it's considered a really risky drug, but particularly it's incredibly addictive. So people who use heroin and use SPICE will say that SPICE withdrawal is like heroin withdrawal. And so it's an incredibly addictive drug, which kind of goes to make it ever more risky, particularly when we start talking about teenagers using it.
And is it right that it doesn't smell or taste? It's very difficult to detect.
So what we find in prison is that it's soaked onto paper and smoked. But what we find in schools is that it's sold, made up into a vape liquid, and then sold usually as a fake cannabis or a THC vape. So all it will smell of is vape liquid. So it doesn't have a characteristic cannabis-like smell. It's actually got nothing to do with cannabis, so you can't detect it by its odour.
You found with your research that vapes confiscated now from more than 100 schools, from different geographical regions across the country, that basically 13%, and in some regions 1 in 4 of those vapes that have been confiscated, or the e-liquids handed in, contain SPICE.
That's right.
Now we know that I don't think any of those students have knowingly bought that as a SPICE e-liquid or a SPICE vape, have they?
Probably a very small number, yeah.
So how can we protect, if somebody is buying e-liquids online, what should they look out for? How can they tell that there's SPICE in that liquid rather than dope or what they think is cannabis or something a bit more benign?
Yeah, and I think, on social media where you'll see this sold, it's always called a THC liquid. So, and if it presents as something like this, truly a vape liquid and moves around like a liquid, and there's lots of videos of them, it will not be THC, it will be SPICE. If it's an unlabeled bottle like this, it will be SPICE, never THC. Another indication, I think, is the price. If it's maybe £10-20 for this 10 millilitre bottle, then it'll be SPICE. Whereas if it's THC, if that's what someone's seeking, then it's going to be much more like a thick oil or a brown, almost like a resin, right? But these kind of true THC pens, it might be something like £60. And this goes to the reason that it's marketed as THC, because for lots of young people, they don't view it as particularly risky or a normal part of adolescent life. But actually, very few teenagers have got a spare £60. But actually, if it's just a few pounds to fill up a vape, then there's much more chance.
And what are the side effects of using SPICE, by mistake, like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they can be quite acute. So psychosis, so really big changes in behaviour, seizures in particular. Lots of teenagers collapse after they use it, can have heart problems. We've had reports of people stop breathing, things like that. So it's really very, very risky.
Okay, and THC is illegal as well,
Yeah.
yeah? And we're very worried about the effect of THC on the teenage brain. Could you just tell us what its effects are?
Yeah, so particularly in teenagers, THC can change that kind of teenage brain because it's still developing, and it can cause longer term psychiatric problems through someone's life that can include psychosis or schizophrenia or kind of pervasive longer term psychiatric problems. Yeah.
And I presume because they're illegal, you don't know what the strength is of the THC in them?
Yeah, they can. So this is an example of a few pens, but you really won't know how strong they are, and it can vary hugely. And of course, the stronger it is, the riskier it is. Yeah.
And THC is the psychoactive element, yeah, of
That's right.
cannabis.
So cannabis, you have THC and you have CBD. CBD is legal in this country; it doesn't really do anything. THC is illegal because it's a strong psychoactive drug.
Brilliant. And can we talk a little bit about, I think quite a lot of people are confused now that disposable vapes are banned, what the new disposable pods look like, and therefore if somebody's using them, how they can maybe buy the refillable liquids more safely.
Yeah. So this is an example of these kind of, if you like, devices that have come to replace the true disposables. So here, this would have been what you would have bought and you just throw it in the bin, but now you buy essentially a battery and a set of different pods that you can put in there. Right, so sometimes you can actually fill these up with your own liquid again, which is how the SPICE liquid would be used to fill it up. And they present in a bunch of different ways. There's loads of different brands that do that. I think the reality is the only way you can be really confident, particularly if you're buying a liquid, the only way you can be really confident that it's not risky to you is if you buy it in a reputable shop. That's just really the only means. If you're buying on social media, I think it does carry a risk with it.
So the safest choice, if somebody is vaping, that they buy their e-liquid or anything refillable in as bigger or safer shop as they possibly can.
If you can, but of course they technically shouldn't be serving you because it's still illegal to purchase. Yeah.
For if somebody's under the age of 18.
That's right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in terms of, we know that a lot of vapes are given to teenagers and shared. So we would like to sort of say that we want teenagers to think almost that sharing a vape is a little bit like drink spiking, that you can never know what you're being offered. So what sort of tips do you think we could give?
I think that's exactly right. We'll see lots of cases where somebody will offer someone a vape, say, try this, you'll like it, and it's actually Spice, and then they collapse. I hear that story a lot. So peer-to-peer dealing is actually quite common for Spice. We've certainly seen examples of some vapes where it's a system where you can change the chamber that it vapes.
The twister vapes.
Yeah, but one side's been normal and one side's been Spice. And you really worry about that in terms of using that to spike someone, because the worry you have is because it makes you, kind of not in your body and can make you collapse, you're really, really vulnerable at that point. So I do think of it exactly like spiking, and I think that is that message to say, don't be sharing vapes. Yeah.
So especially at parties or like going off to Freshers Week, outside the pub, if somebody you've recently met, even like first dates, to be as mindful as you would be with your drink, really.
I think if you treat it exactly how you treat drink spiking, treat it in exactly the same way.
Same way, that's really, really helpful. If somebody's offered a vape liquid or sees a vape liquid, what are the top tips for being able to tell whether it's got spice in it?
So about half the time it's a liquid that's a bright colour, and actually commercially they just aren't sold as bright colours. So that would be, your first thing. An unlabelled, unbranded, plain bottle exactly like this, that would be how they're sold really on social media. But it can be, if you like, a normal vape liquid colour, but then your clue is really that it's just a completely unbranded bottle. It won't smell of anything in particular other than just vape liquid, so you don't kind of get a clue there.
So Chris, we know that pupils or children are being given vape liquids, they don't know that spice is in it. What are the top tips to be able to spot whether a vape liquid or vape juice has got spice in it?
So the first thing is it will always be a liquid. It will never be like a thick resin or an oil, and about half the time it can be a bright colour, so you know, pink, red, purple. Those colours don't really come in commercially available liquids. You know, the other half of the time, the truth is that it might look like a normal vape liquid, kind of yellowy, but almost always in these bottles, they're unlabelled, they're unbranded, looking kind of exactly something like this. If it's in a refillable vape, all you can really do is look for some kind of an odd colour being present in there, and that'll be your indication. But say it won't smell of anything particular other than a regular vape liquid.
So no label, often bright colours, cheap price, and doesn't smell of cannabis in any way, basically. So those would be our top tips?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. So THC is another thing that, you know, is appearing in vapes quite a lot. If someone's offered a vape, how could they know that there's THC in it? How could they spot a THC vape, if you like?
So with THC vapes, they're never a liquid. It's always like an oil or a resin, and you know, often in a sort of a branded single-use vape. So we can see here, you know, the kind of material in there doesn't really flow or move. The volume of it also is really low compared to a normal vape, so maybe a little chamber in there compared to something designed to take a liquid which has a really big chamber for putting a liquid in, so that would be really common. I think the other thing is also the smell. It will smell like cannabis, and if you're familiar with that smell, you'll be able to ID it. But also they're generally expensive, so something like that might be £60.
Okay, so if somebody's offered that, do you think there's often like a motive then, almost around spiking? Because that's an expensive piece of kit, isn't it?
I don't think that, actually.
Okay, we can cut this. We won't use this bit.
I think that's someone looking for.
So how's somebody got £60 to spend on a vape?
Exactly.
And I say 14. I mean, that's.
But some kids do, right?
Yeah.
So you know, that's why you only find 1% of the things we get in school are THC, 13% are spice, because they haven't got £60. If they had the money, they'd be buying that.
They'd be buying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. So for professionals, say for example when vapes are being confiscated in schools or youth settings or whatever, how could somebody tell if it's a THC vape?
So if it's a THC vape, it will almost always actually be in a vape pen. So whereas our spice liquids are going to be usually in a bottle and it's truly a liquid, actually it's usually already in a pen, and it's going to be a thick oil or almost like a resin that just doesn't move when you turn it upside down. It's often in a branded pen, often with a cannabis symbol or some other allusion to cannabis on it. And the volume's really, really low, so they usually only hold about a milliliter, whereas if we took a pen designed for a liquid, a vape liquid, you know, it's designed for a couple of millilitres, so the volume's much lower. But also, you know, it'll smell strongly of cannabis. If you're familiar with that smell, it's another easy way to identify these. It's a really expensive product, so only 1% of what we find in schools are THC vapes, because they're about £60 for a vape, whereas 13% of what we find is actually spice, just because it's so much vastly cheaper. So they're more rare, but they're very easy to identify.
So in summary, in a sense, if it's spice, it's going to be a liquid, but that liquid could have been put into the new form of disposable of reusable vapes. Yeah. If it's THC, it's more likely to be a sort of pre-filled, quite elegant, expensive vape pen.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
really helpful.
And I think it's worth saying the easiest thing is vape. Spice liquid is always truly a liquid, and in an unlabelled, unbranded bottle like that. This is what you're looking out for in your schools. If you're seeing this kind of bottle in your school, it's almost 100% spice.
But if it's actually already pre-filled in a vape pen, is there a way of spotting, because it doesn't smell? Yeah,
all you can look for is a bright colour. So if it looks like blue, green, red, then very likely to be spice. Only about half the time is it a very bright colour. The rest of the time it's kind of brown or yellow like normal vape liquid, but it gives you some indication.
And if a school or setting is worried about some of the products that it's confiscated, what can we advise them to do? Yeah,
usually I think you want to get some sort of support either from a youth drug and alcohol charity or even from the police. So all the police forces we work with are great. They're never interested in criminalising young people, but they've got a really good sense of what this material looks like and what the risks are like in the area, and so you should be able to be passed on to them. I think, you know, if you get something like this, you know it's spice, no question. And then you can have a bit of a helpful dialogue, hopefully, with that young person that you found it with, particularly thinking about their local circumstance, you know, whether they're at a higher or greater risk depending on their family background.
So basically, what I'm worried about with teachers is any savvy kid is just going to pre-filled, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah,
they do. And the truth is, well, what we get in schools, half of the fines look like that, and half of the fines look like that. And that's really difficult because you just aren't going to know. But what usually they'll have is there's some behavioural change that's associated with the vaping that's really weird.
But I think what's really helpful with the liquids is that with our youngsters buying online, they will be able to understand more.
100%. Well, when even the teachers, they'll just see these on the floor.
Oh, see, what, an empty one on the floor?
Yeah, and they'll just, because I'm sure they just step over them all the time. But if you know that, at least you know it's in the school.
Well, we certainly find that with pouches. They don't know what they are. Yeah. You know, they're sort of finding in the sports bags and things that don't know what they are.
But these are really easy because these are really easy to spot.
Yes.
But they're just not as common.
They're easy to spot, but nobody knows what they are. That's what we're finding whenever we show them.
Yeah, what is that? Yeah, 100%.
Neither teachers or youngsters who are offered them know that they've got THC in.
Yeah.
So, and I'm really pleased we've covered the spiking element. I think that's really
I agree
good.
with you.
Oh, no, that's lovely, Chris.
Right.
Okay, so Rachel, we know that there's a legal maximum vape size, if you like, for adults, which is roughly about 600 puffs.
Yeah, correct.
Are you finding there are a lot of products that are coming into your lab that are much higher nicotine levels than that, much bigger puff rates, if you like?
Yeah, so we've analysed over 2,000 vapes that have come into the lab, and we find that a lot of them look something like this. So they have, it could be up to 10 times the amount of puffs in each vape. So some have 6,000 puffs, which could be the equivalent of, say, 10 packets of cigarettes. Which
6,000 to 9,000 puffs per device.
Exactly,
so the same amount of nicotine in one device.
Correct.
As 10 packets of cigarets.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what, sort of about 15, maybe £20 per device?
Yeah, exactly that, yeah. And so for children, that could present a lot of harm to them.
Yeah, exactly. And also they seem to be very bright colours.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got skulls and they've got gorillas on, things like that.
Yeah.
So, and I presume, are they bought online again? Is that where these are being purchased?
So we find that a lot of children, because they're not allowed to buy them in vape shops, they're likely to buy them either from friends at schools or other dealers, children that may be dealing them at schools. But often we find they also get them on social media platforms like Snapchat. And so for the branding to be aimed towards children and young adults, it definitely fits in with that Snapchat media.
So parents and professionals really need to be really mindful if they spot one of these devices, just how strong and potent they are.
Exactly.
And because they're illegal, again, they're unregulated, aren't they? Even if some of them are quite well-known brands.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So, I mean, we still see them sold in vape shops around the country. And it doesn't even have to have the illicit substances in them for the danger to be presented to kids. So
they might not have like a health warning, for example, or is that right? Or
so usually they do have a health warning on the packaging,
okay.
But this will be standard throughout the packaging. I don't think it will be specific to the larger puff vapes.
So nobody would have a sense really of the level of nicotine and the amount that they're ingesting and the harm it might do.
Correct, yeah.
Brilliant, that's really helpful. Recently, the last sort of 18 months, we've seen a huge rise in nicotine pouches that we're finding in schools, and that particularly teenagers and boys are using. And at the moment, they can be given, sold, marketed to children, which we just find extraordinary until the new tobacco and vapes bill comes in. So do you just want to sort of maybe just talk us through what these things look like, for parents and professionals to look out for?
So this is an example of some of the nicotine pods that we find that come into the lab here. This particular type of nicotine pod has a very high nicotine content of
50 milligrams. So if we think an average cigarette has 12 milligrams, but you actually breathe in about 2 milligrams, that's 50 milligrams per pouch. I mean, that's unbelievably strong, isn't it? That's like sticking 10 cigarettes here.
Yeah, exactly.
Under your gum.
So they'll put it up under their gum and between their lip and their mouth, and that will just sit there throughout the day. And not only is that a really high amount of nicotine, it's also really dangerous for their gums. And so these pose quite a lot of danger, and we're seeing they're growing in popularity.
And we've also seen challenges on like TikTok and Instagram of how many pouches you can cram in your mouth and things like that, almost as though it's something quite funny, and that I don't think there's really an understanding of the high nicotine levels in these products, and you just have to read the packaging carefully, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Definitely could be dangerous for children.
And even for adults too, not just for children. If we're talking, 20 milligrams, 30 milligrams, up to 50 milligrams, there's no legal maximum because they contain synthetic nicotine, so they don't fall under the regulation. So the reason why they're not regulated is because at the moment, although it will change with the tobacco vapes bill, is because they contain synthetic nicotine, which of course is very powerful and very strong. Okay. I think that's probably all we need to say, because a lot of teachers again don't know how these can be given, sold or marketed to children if they've got nicotine in this, but they fall out of the law because they've got synthetic nicotine in rather than tobacco derived
I see what you mean.
nicotine. Okay. So that's the difference.
So this is a device that we've developed for detecting spice and THC in vapes and vape liquids, and actually in edibles as well. And the idea is that police forces or other groups can have something like this so that they can test what's coming out of the school. So, Rachel will show us. We know this is one of our spice liquids, for example. It's that unlabelled, unbranded bottle, which is so almost always spice. And we can just squirt a little bit of that material onto a little paper disc here, and what it's going to do is we kind of spread it out on that paper disc a little bit, and then it shines a bright ultraviolet light on the sample, and what we're looking for is what's called the fluorescence of the drug that we then detect. So it's going to go through a cycle of checking for spice and THC, and then even some other drugs that we kind of look for. So it takes like 10-30 seconds depending. So that bright red light that's come up there, that's indicative of it being spice. If it was THC, it would go purple, and then we have other colours for other drugs.